The dining room smelled like the life I'd been saving for. Rosemary charred at the edges, butter melting into a pan of new potatoes, a slow-reduced veal jus breathing like a quiet promise. The lights above the chef's pass softened the stainless steel into gold. My hair and skin, paler than most under the tungsten, caught those lights and looked almost like another lamp, a subtle contrast to the warm colors of the room. At the center of the floor, beneath a low pendant, sat the VIP table, linen folded, crystal waiting, a small wooden plaque with a single word burned into it, family, its letters deliberate as an offering. I was there behind the pass, hands still warm from plating the first seating, watching steam curl around the ramekins. The place I had designed in my head for a decade, the layout of the dining room, the rhythm of the service, the exact pitch of the music, was finally a thing you could walk into. My team moved like muscle memory. Mateo at the sauté station, Lily calling tickets, Sam tending the bar. The sound was a quiet machine. I should have been tremulous or dizzy. Instead, I felt the thin, sharp focus of someone who had waited so long that nothing could surprise them. My phone buzzed against the linen of my jacket. I didn't look. The kitchen has its own etiquette for phones. Eyes up, hands free. It buzzed again, relentless. I wiped my palms on my apron and checked it between courses. A new post. My father and my brother in a crowded sports bar, beer bottles and neon surrounding them, grins broad and easy. My brother's arm flung over my father's shoulder, same posture he always struck in photos, the practiced ease of someone who's never had to account for what he takes. The caption was nothing, just a smattering of emojis and a check-in at a place called Victory Pub. There were 6 comments under it from people I didn't know, laughing along. No can't wait, no will be there, no sign that either of them had remembered anything other than their own night. The plaque at the VIP table felt heavier than the wood deserved. I walked out front, set an entree on the pass, and it sat there like a small, perfect thing. The table stayed empty. I took the plaque into the kitchen, set it on the stainless under the heat lamp, and snapped it in half. It made a clean, private sound, more like breaking a wish than a vow. I turned the 2 halves toward the dining room and signaled Lily. "Seat them," I said. 2 at the bar, everyone else fills in. My voice was even. Around me, people moved and the restaurant began to breathe as it was meant to. New people filling new seats, my food going to mouths that hadn't known my name the day before. I texted my father a single line. "Table is open to customers. Don't come." Sent. If you're watching this, and you've ever had to build something you were told you didn't need to build, drop a comment. Where are you listening from, and what time is it? When the plates were down and the runners had begun to laugh over spilled salt, the memory of every unpaid hour came back to me in a single ledger I kept by habit in my head, a list of favors, forgone payments, the long arithmetic of care. I'd started cooking because heat made sense to me. Numbers on invoices made sense too. Margins, yields, the precise way a reduction thickened. For the better part of a decade, I worked double shifts, line hours and construction weekends, nights after service doing the spreadsheet that would become my lease application. I missed birthdays and graduations, not because I didn't care, but because I'd convinced myself the absence would be temporary and necessary, like proofing dough, a slow work that would eventually yield a rise. They called me reliable. They called themselves supportive. I carried their forms and their notarized excuses to banks, and more often than not, covered their accidental needs. A borrowed card, a quick cash infusion, the cost of a broken-down car. My brother, golden to everyone else, had a talent for making trouble look like charm. He opened and closed enterprises the way some people change their shoes. A new idea, a new confidence, and then somehow more debt than momentum. When the debts came due, the phone would ring and my name would be the one that meant rescue. I'd become invisible in a ledger that was only ever balanced one way, my credit on the line, their credit intact. There were entries I can still see when I close my eyes. $20 here for a bail bond, $500 in 2020 for a mixer that would pay for itself. Times when I covered rent without mentioning it because words felt like begging. I did not keep these tallies for a moral complaint. I kept them because memory is a kind of accounting, and the ledger was the true record of what had actually happened. So the plaque snapped. I'd built the restaurant so I wouldn't be called on anymore to pick up other people's pieces. Standing there watching strangers' faces light up at the first course, I felt a private, steady pride that had nothing to do with applause. The next morning, my father appeared on the stoop like someone who expected to be let in. He had that practiced expression, concern threaded with entitlement. "I heard about last night," he said, scanning the dining room like a man checking inventory. "Listen, there's an opportunity Alex has. He needs $50,000 to get it off the ground. It's time to help family. This is what family does." He used the tested language of that household. Help, family, investment, all of it softened to a moral demand. He didn't ask. He leaned on the host stand, his posture empty of the humility the request would have required. I had the ledger open in my head before he finished. I could see the small lines of what had already been given, money that had been framed as loans but lived as favors. I could also see the truth. Alex's opportunities had a way of turning into other people's bills. There was the $80,000 hole I'd heard whispered about, an amount he'd shrugged off like a small storm. There had been moments when I picked up his tab so people would stop calling me at 3 a.m. I could list each instance of being asked and each instance of being used. I could feel the weight of it the way a chef feels the knife. "No," I said without looking at him. My voice was calm enough that he looked taken aback. "I don't invest family money in gambling debts. I built this place so I didn't have to keep fixing your choices." He blinked, shocked at the firmness of my refusal. The room pulsed with a sudden silence, as if the word had been a door closing. He tried to charm me, to frame it as a temporary loan that would be paid back. He mentioned co-signed loans from years ago and how things had been hard. And then he said, almost as an afterthought, "We thought we could count on you." "Counting on me isn't a right," I said. "It's a privilege. You're on my property as my guest. If you'd like to stay, people who contribute stay. If you're here to take, you leave." I remember the small click of his jaw, as if the realization had been physically unpleasant. I pointed to the office and told him to pack a bag. He tried one last time to shame me. Family narratives are good at that. So I reached for what I'd learned from managing staff and kitchens. Boundaries are clear instructions. With my hands steady, I told him the door was closed to further financial requests. I called a cab and watched him go, cataloging the difference between relief and triumph in the way the room breathed out when he left. It was decisive and it was necessary, but I knew boundaries had teeth only if you could back them up. That night, a faxed copy of a complaint from the health department arrived folded on my desk. A neighbor had called in a report about vermin. The inspector was due within hours. In a restaurant, the phrase health complaint is a cold instrument. It can empty tables and erode trust in a few hours if handled poorly. I welcomed the inspector with as much composure as I could. He was a man with a clipboard and a flashlight. He looked like every bureaucrat in a uniform, neutral, procedural, immune to family drama. He walked the kitchen like a priest seeing the altar. He checked the walk-in, counted supplies, smelled the grease trap. He opened cabinets and sniffed at the drains. The report could have been a faint smear of anything, but he found nothing. No infestation, no violations, just a clean operation and a kitchen that hummed. Later, the administrative note came back. The complaint was traced to a phone number registered as a concern from a relative. The words concerned relative were clinical and murderous all at once. Someone had weaponized worry. That was when the security footage became an act of salvation. We reviewed cameras, entrance angles, the alley on the side. There, in grainy black and white, my brother's silhouette moved along the back wall at dawn a week before opening, hands in pockets, glancing at the delivery door. Another clip showed him lingering at the curb outside on a quiet night, a face I knew, leaning into phone calls. It wasn't dramatic, it was small, patient, the sort of behavior that adds up into consequence over time. Casing, not for a heist, but for advantage. I filed a police report. I told them the complaint had been false, that someone had maliciously tried to damage my business. I handed over the clips and their timestamps. The detective was careful, procedural. He made notes, he took the USB. It wasn't the slamming justice of a courtroom show. I wouldn't let it be. But it was paper, jurisdiction, a public record. I learned to value that kind of ink. Not long after, Kayla came in like a rainstorm, tense, pale, eyes wide with something that could have been fear or relief. She had been my brother's partner for years, and until that moment, she'd been a regular presence at family functions, at barbecues, a smiling fixture. She sat at the counter that night, hands fidgeting with a napkin, and told me she needed to talk, privately. She spoke in a rush, the way people do when they have kept a wait for too long. She told me there was no legitimate venture. The $50,000 my father had asked for wasn't a bridge to profitability. It was meant to cover a debt, to buy silence, to be funneled into a pocket that would disappear. She said Alex owed $80,000 to people who were not people you ignored. She said he'd been talking in urgent tones about liquidating anything that could be owned, assets, accounts, anything he could take under a guise of partnership. Then she did the thing that made everything real. She placed a phone on the pass and hit play. The audio was thin, the room behind it small and far off. I listened to my brother laugh, my father's voice smoothing intent into concern. There was a phrase that made my stomach cold, power of attorney. There was a casualness to it, as if this were a family transaction, not a betrayal. They discussed steps, paperwork, signatures, who could be used as a cosigner, and they treated my restaurant like an item in a cookie jar. She handed me a file. Inside were messages, bank notifications, small snapshots of the life they'd been crafting at my expense. She told me she was pregnant. She swore she had no interest in taking sides. She only wanted to protect what she believed was right. For a long minute, I only heard the refrigerator hum and the far-off sound of a bus. Then everything aligned into purpose. I called my lawyer. I made a list of what could be proven. The camera timestamps, the audio, the posts, the social media evidence that my family had been celebrating instead of supporting me on opening night. I went to the police with the new audio and said plainly I believed there had been a conspiracy to defraud or to coerce. The words were legal and careful. The officer took a report with weighty politeness and told me the next steps. They also gave advice I was too proud to need. Document everything, keep evidence in multiple places. The law is not a drama. It is a slow, cold light. I liked it because it refused to be theatrical. It simply recorded. A few days later, my father and my brother knocked on the front door like men in a play coming to demand their lines. They carried a folder of documents titled Partnership Agreement, the kind of paper that smells of printers and ambition. They smiled the easy smile of people used to doors being given, not opened. I told them to come into the dining room. The entire restaurant had been put on notice. Staff sat in shifts doing the prep. I had printed copies of the police report and a letter from my lawyer sitting on the host stand. I asked Mateo to stand behind me. Lily and Sam were nearby. The recording was cued on my phone, its speaker hooked into the restaurant's small sound system for ambient music when we closed. I didn't want drama. I wanted truth, to be audible, to be undeniable. When they began to speak, my hands were steady. They talked about partnership as if partnership were automatic because of blood. My father used the old language, we support family. My brother tried the charm, promises of future returns, of loyalty. Then I played the recording. The sound was thin and slightly grainy. For all that, their voices were recognizable. The conversation that had been casually conspiratorial now sounded to anyone listening like what it was, plans to strip assets, to take control of something that did not belong to them. There was surprise on their faces, shock not because they'd been caught, but because the evidence had metamorphosed into something public. I slid the police report across the table and unfurled the restraining orders my attorney prepared after consultation. No contact, no coming within a set distance, no attempts to access accounts. Those were legal instruments. They were not meant to be revenge, but to establish boundaries that could be enforced. They argued, pleaded, threatened the old ways, family shame, emotional blackmail. I did not rise to it. I read the law's words out loud, calmly, and told them the doors were locked to financial discussions. I told them how the restaurant had been built, by my labor, by the people around me who showed up and bought tickets, who took shifts and trusted the product. You cannot build community by erasing it. They left. They walked out not with dignity, but with a small, measured rage that is the only thing entitlement knows to feel when it hits a wall. I watched their taillights in the alley and felt a strange clarity settle in me. I had not wanted to cut ties, but I was not going to be the bank for their recklessness any longer. The weeks that followed were careful work. We posted apologies for the inspection rumor, admitted the truth where necessary, and made sure the public saw the kitchen the way the inspector had, clean, open, honest. We tightened bookkeeping, we put locks on certain accounts and changed passwords. We restaffed hours. The legal measures were not a dramatic hammer, so much as a set of locks on a door that had been left open too long. Something else happened, quieter and more meaningful than paperwork. An old guest left me a napkin. It was on a small table near the window, folded under a glass so that only the edges showed. Lily brought it to me at the end of a long night. On the napkin was a scribble in blue ink. Integrity tastes better than anything. Below it was a folded check for $2,500 and a note, for you and the team. Keep the lights on. Whoever left it did not want credit. Whoever left it saw that sometimes the only currency that matters is the kind you earn by being steady. Word spread. The critic, who had been anonymous in their praise, left a note. No fuss, no headline, just a short line on a small card slipped under the door. You fed us more than food. There were calls from neighborhood shops asking if they could advertise on our corkboard. The regulars brought friends. Our staff, who had worked through the nights and the insults, began to feel like a family, formed not by blood, but by effort. We baked those bonds in the heat of service, not the heat of drama, but the heat of what actually makes something last. Shared labor, shared pride, shared paychecks. Kayla visited sometimes, often with a small hand resting under her shirt. She would stand at the pass and watch plates go by, eyes bright in a way that finally seemed at ease. When she told me about the pregnancy, she did not expect a trophy. She wanted to be clear. She had come forward because she was tired of living with fear. She wanted to be part of something that did not hurt people. We made a small joke about how food is the easiest way to win a baby's approval. She laughed, and the sound felt like a bridge being built. I do not tell this story to celebrate the downfall of my family. They were never monsters. They were people with habits that always tilted toward taking rather than giving back. They made choices that harmed themselves and, by extension, me. I mourn that. I mourn the possibility of different outcomes. But there is a distinction between mourning and martyrdom. I refused to be the latter. There were nights I would stand in the alley after service, the heat lamp buzzing in the kitchen, and I would feel my skin in a particular way. The way light made me both visible and particular. Being albino in a room of warm faces brought a certain sharpness to the visual field. I never used that as a shield or as a sword. It is simply how I am. The way the lights pick up on me at the pass, the way guests sometimes comment on the whiteness of my hair between courses. It has never defined my work. It has only been part of the image that sits over the idea of who I am. The important thing is that the work itself, sauce, stock, service, doesn't care about identity. It cares about skill and consistency. There are practical lessons in what happened. A restaurant is not just recipes, and recipes are not just tricks. They are contracts of trust with the people who sit at your tables. A ledger is a moral document. The numbers you keep for other people are the promises you make to yourself. Legal remedies are slow and dull, but they are necessary when soft boundaries become porous. And community, our found family, does not always come from the place you were born. Sometimes it is the person who shows up on a rainy night with a napkin and a check, or the server who covers a shift so you can rest. Weeks turned into months, and the VIP plaque was never replaced. We left the space where family had stood for a while, with a small plant on the table, green, alive, in sunlight. People asked if I'd ever forgive. Forgiveness is a private thing. It is not a timetable. I forgive in small increments when it stops hurting to see the old photographs. The critic's napkin remains folded in a drawer beneath the till. The check paid salaries that month. More important than money was the letter that followed from a woman who had been at opening night whose husband had recently passed. She wrote that in that small room she had felt a kind of welcome she had not expected. She said she'd come back, and she did. She brought friends, she told others. Her story multiplied into a steady Sunday that has fed us more reliably than any review ever could. When people ask how I kept my head, I tell them the truth. Discipline. You measure stock and you measure people. If a thing is worth keeping, you mark it, you protect it, you make sure the light gets to it. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are the structure that allows love to be possible without suffocation. People ask if I'm bitter. Sometimes, in the quiet after service, when I am washing pans and the steam fogs the stainless, a small ember of anger still warms me. But the larger feeling is relief, the kind you get when a hot pan is set on a trivet. It makes sense. It feels like rest. That rest is what allowed me to go small and fierce about the work again, to try a new garnish, to recalibrate a sauce, to teach Matteo how to hand-cut a mirepoix the way my mentor taught me, to sit down with a guest who asks about the menu and actually have time to tell the story. You asked at the beginning where you were listening from. I'm telling you this now because if you are someone who has ever had to build a table with your own hands, physically or emotionally, then you know the shape of this work. It is not revenge. It is not a spectacle. It is long, small, exacting, and full of the ordinary heroics people perform when they choose to show up. If you're sitting there with a ledger in your head of your own, with favors tallied and apologies unpaid, remember, setting a boundary is not the same as burning a bridge. It is the act of carving a safe passage for the life you want to live. The law and the locks helped me, yes, but the thing that saved the restaurant was the people who returned with gratitude, the staff who chose to stay, the quiet notes and nudges from strangers who turned into patrons. On an afternoon not long ago, a table of 4 insisted on buying me a drink. They were regulars now, their laughter familiar. At the end of the meal, the woman, the one whose husband had passed, leaned over and said softly, "I've had many dinners, but this felt like coming home." I thanked her, and then I told my team to go home early that night. We turned off the music and sat with the lights low, the oven cooling down. In the corner, the plant where the VIP plaque once stood caught a slant of light and sent it back out into the room. If you have ever had to walk away from family expectations to keep what you built, if you have ever had to break a quiet thing in order to make it whole again, then share this. Tell someone your story. You are not alone. I'm Albino. I opened my dream restaurant and invited my family. When they didn't show up, I sat down and fed the people who did. Share this if you've had to build your own table. You're not alone.